One of the biggest mistakes people make after getting sued by a debt collector in Texas is pretending it's not happening. Because that panic you feel right after somebody hands you court papers, that's exactly what debt collectors are counting on. You open your door or check your mail, and suddenly you're holding paperwork with a court name on it saying you're being sued. And immediately your brain starts racing. Can they take my paycheck? Am I going to lose my bank account? Do I have to go to court? What happens if I can't pay this? And the scary part is, a lot of people make their worst decisions in the first few days after getting sued. Because once panic takes over, people stop thinking clearly. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through what actually happens after a debt collector sues you in Texas, the mistakes that can seriously hurt your case early, and what you should understand before you panic and accidentally make the situation worse. I'm Avia Gauthier, a Texas attorney, and if you've just been sued by a debt collector, the first thing I want you to understand is this. First, take a breath. Getting sued by a debt collector does not automatically mean you already lost, but what you do in the first few days matters a lot. And unfortunately, most people make emotional decisions before they understand how the process actually works. So let's walk through this step by step in plain English. One of the biggest mistakes people make is simply ignoring the lawsuit. And honestly, most people don't ignore it because they're irresponsible. They ignore it because they're overwhelmed, embarrassed, scared, ashamed. A lot of people convince themselves, maybe this isn't serious. Maybe they won't follow through. Maybe I'll deal with it later. But debt collection lawsuits usually do not disappear just because somebody avoids them. And debt buyers know that. In fact, a huge number of these cases depend on people never responding at all. Because if nobody responds, the collector may be able to get what's called a default judgment. And the problem is, most people don't emotionally understand what that means until the damage has already started. A lot of people don't realize they lost the case until months later when life suddenly starts getting harder. Maybe now there's a problem renting an apartment, getting financing, opening certain accounts. That's usually the moment people realize this was much bigger than just another collection letter. This became a court case, and by then, they're already behind. But here's the part most people never see coming. A lot of people imagine debt collection lawsuits as some massive legal operation, where somebody spent months personally building a case against them. But many debt collection lawsuits are volume operations. Some companies file huge numbers of cases, and statistically, many people never respond. That's part of the business model. Now, to be clear, that does not mean somebody should ignore the lawsuit thinking, oh, they probably can't prove anything. That's dangerous thinking. But in some situations, the lawsuit itself becomes the pressure tactic. Because once somebody sees court paperwork, most people stop thinking clearly. And collectors know that. Silence helps collectors. Confusion helps collectors. Panic helps collectors. Because the more emotionally overwhelmed somebody becomes, the easier it is for them to make rushed decisions before understanding their actual options. And this is where people often make another huge mistake. They panic and immediately start throwing money at the problem before they understand the process. And honestly, this next mistake may be the most expensive one people make. This happens all the time. Somebody gets sued, and within hours, they're calling the collector in full panic mode, apologizing, admitting everything immediately, offering direct access to bank accounts. Some people borrow money from family immediately. Some people empty savings accounts trying to make the fear stop. Some people agree to payment plans they already know they probably cannot maintain. And look, that fear is real. Most people have never dealt with the legal system before. But fear causes people to negotiate emotionally instead of strategically. Collectors understand that the period right after somebody gets sued is often when they're emotionally weakest, and sometimes trying to do the right thing too fast can actually make the situation worse, especially if somebody agrees to payments they realistically cannot afford long-term, or starts making decisions before understanding the timeline, the court process, possible settlement options, possible defenses, or what documentation the collector actually has. Again, this is not about escaping debt. This is about understanding the situation before making panic decisions that can follow somebody for years. But here's the moment a lot of people finally realize something important. Getting sued does not automatically mean you already lost. And when somebody properly responds to a lawsuit, the dynamic changes. Because now the case actually has to move through the legal process. Now deadlines matter for both sides. Now there's time to evaluate the case. Now there may be opportunities to negotiate differently. Possible defenses can be reviewed. Documentation may matter more. And most importantly, the person being sued is no longer completely absent from the process. That's a major psychological shift. Because people often go from, I'm doomed, to, okay, maybe I actually have options here. And that mental shift matters. Because panic is usually where the worst decisions happen. Not information, not process, not strategy. Panic. This is where many people hurt themselves the most. Ironically, a lot of people don't get hurt because they owed money. They get hurt because they disappear from the process. They stop opening mail, stop checking notices, miss deadlines, miss hearings, and then suddenly they're shocked months later when life becomes harder in ways they didn't expect. Maybe there's an issue with an apartment application, a financing problem, a business opportunity that suddenly gets more complicated. Again, every case is different, and Texas has laws and protections that matter. But ignoring a lawsuit is usually one of the worst things somebody can do, especially because many people wait too long before getting information. And by the time they finally start asking questions, they're reacting to consequences instead of preventing them. That's why understanding the process early matters so much. Even if somebody ultimately settles, even if somebody is financially overwhelmed, even if somebody cannot pay immediately. Information creates options. Silence usually reduces them. So if you've been sued by a debt collector in Texas, here are the first things you should focus on. First, do not ignore the lawsuit. Second, figure out your deadlines as quickly as possible. Third, do not make panic decisions just because you're scared. And fourth, start organizing everything connected to the account. Court paperwork, letters, emails, payment records, anything related to the debt. The people who usually handle these situations best are not always the people with the most money. They're usually the people who stopped panicking early enough to start making decisions clearly. And remember, getting sued feels terrifying, partly because most people have never been through the court system before. But panic and silence are usually what help debt collectors the most. Understanding the process is what helps you. If you're dealing with a debt lawsuit in Texas, subscribe because we're going to keep breaking this process down step by step in plain English. We'll be covering things like wage garnishment in Texas, debt buyer tactics, settlement strategies, court deadlines, and mistakes people make that can seriously hurt their cases. And if you need legal help with a Texas debt lawsuit, you can find the firm's contact information in the description below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.